laughed when I walked into the courtroom without a lawyer. Not a quiet laugh. Not a polite smirk he tried to hide behind his hand. He turned to his attorney, the one in the $800 suit with the silver cufflinks, and he laughed loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. His mother, sitting right behind him, pressed her lips together in that way she always did when she was pleased about something, like she'd won something already. I set my folder on the table and sat down. My husband had been telling people for months that I didn't understand how money worked, that I was sweet but impractical, that I'd never held a real job, never built anything, never had to fight for anything in my life. He'd said it so many times to so many people that I think he actually believed it. That was his first mistake. I want to tell you how we got here because the courtroom wasn't the beginning. The courtroom was just the ending. The real story started 3 years earlier at a dinner party in River North when a man I barely knew told me I had a gift. I was 28 when I married my husband. He was 36, already running his own commercial real estate firm on the north side of Chicago, and he had a way of walking into a room that made everyone turn to look at him. Not because he was the tallest or the loudest, but because he moved like he already knew how everything was going to go. I met him at a work event. I was a junior analyst at a wealth management firm downtown, which he found charming in the way a person finds a child's artwork charming. Sweet, but not serious. He asked me to dinner. I said yes, because he was interesting and because he made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone was paying attention. We dated for 2 years, got engaged at a restaurant in the West Loop, married at a small ceremony in Michigan in October, with the leaves changing and his mother already watching me like she was trying to figure out what I was getting out of this. Looking back, the signs were there before the ring was even on my finger. Small things. He'd correct me in front of people. Gently. Always gently, in a way that made it seem like he was just being precise. He'd tell stories from our relationship where I came out looking a little softer, a little less capable than I actually was. He'd say things like, "You don't need to worry about that," whenever I asked questions about finances, about the properties, about where things stood. I let it go for a long time because I thought that was just how he was. Detail-oriented, protective, a little old-fashioned. But there's a difference between protective and controlling. And I learned it slowly, the way you learn most hard things. Not all at once, but in pieces. Until one day you hold all the pieces up together and finally see the shape of them. The dinner party was 18 months into our marriage. His colleague, a man named Reed, who ran a private equity fund in the Loop, had invited us to his place in Lincoln Park for what turned out to be a work dinner with better wine than most work dinner. There were 8 of us around a long table. I was seated across from a woman named Tess who ran compliance at a mid-size investment firm downtown. The men were talking about a deal. One of those conversations that assumes the women at the table have nothing to contribute, the kind where the sentences stay pointed away from you no matter how you lean in. I'd had 2 glasses of wine. I probably should have stayed quiet. But Tess asked me what I thought about the structure of what they were describing, a sale-leaseback arrangement on 3 commercial properties. And I told her. Quietly, just to her. I said the cap rate assumption seemed optimistic given the current interest rate environment, and that if they were financing with a variable rate instrument, they might want to reconsider the exit timeline. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Where did you say you worked?" And before I could answer, my husband cut in from across the table. Not aggressively, just smoothly, the way he did everything. He said I used to work in finance, but I'd stepped back to focus on the home. Said it like it was a settled fact. Like I was a chapter that had already closed. Tess looked at me. I looked at my wine glass. I didn't correct him, not that night. But I remembered it. What my husband didn't know, what I had never told him because it had never come up, because he'd never thought to ask, was that I had kept my Series 65 license current, that I had a separate brokerage account I'd opened before we married, funded with my own savings, that I'd been quietly managing for 4 years, that I had spent the 18 months of our marriage paying extremely close attention to every document that moved through our household, every tax return, every LLC filing, every property statement. Not because I was suspicious. At first, I genuinely wasn't. I paid attention because paying attention to financial structures was just something my brain did. Like some people notice when a sentence is grammatically off or when a song is slightly out of tune. I noticed when numbers didn't add up. And over time, the numbers in our household had started to not add up. There was a property in Wicker Park that had been refinanced twice in 14 months. There were distributions from two of his LLCs that didn't appear on our joint tax return. There were wire transfers to an account I didn't recognize, small enough individually that they wouldn't trigger a report, but consistent, monthly, like a salary. I didn't say anything, I just started keeping records. By the time he sat me down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night in March and told me he wanted a divorce, I had 14 months of documentation in a folder on a hard drive that I kept at my sister's apartment in Pilsen. He was very calm about it. He said we'd grown apart. He said he cared about me but wasn't in love with me anymore. He said he'd already spoken to an attorney and that given the prenuptial agreement, which, yes, I had signed, 3 weeks before the wedding, when I was 28 and trusting and very much in love, I shouldn't expect much. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're smart enough to land on your feet." He said it kindly. That's the thing about him. He was almost always kind when he was taking something from you. What happened next is the part people always ask about. I did not scream. I did not cry in front of him. I went to our bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for about 20 minutes. Then I called my sister. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to hold on to something for me." She said, "Already done." She's always been faster than me that way. The next 8 months were the most disciplined of my life. I filed my response to the divorce petition on my own, not because I couldn't afford an attorney, I could, by then, but because I needed the opposing counsel to underestimate me. I needed them to see a woman without representation and assume she didn't know what she was doing. His attorney, a man named Calloway, who had a wall of plaques behind his desk and the energy of someone who'd never lost a case he cared about, sent me a series of settlement offers that were genuinely insulting. The first one offered me $30,000 and my personal belongings. The second added the car. The third, after I rejected both, added a small monthly payment that would terminate if I remarried. I rejected all three. Each time I sent back a simple letter, politely worded, professionally formatted, citing specific sections of Illinois marital property law and the relevant case precedent. I could hear the silence on the other end of those rejections. I imagined Calloway reading my letters and frowning. I imagined him telling my husband that I seemed more prepared than expected. I imagined my husband shrugging and telling him I'd gotten the language off the internet. They had no idea. 4 months before the hearing, I made a phone call. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because some of it is still a matter of record and I don't want to say more than I should. What I will say is this. The financial irregularities I had documented, the unreported distributions, the transfers, the refinancing structure on the Wicker Park property were not just irregular. They were, as a forensic accountant I hired quietly would later confirm, potentially fraudulent. I reported what I had found to the appropriate federal agencies. I did it through proper channels. I filed the right forms. I gave them the hard drive which my sister brought me from her apartment in a tote bag with a sunflower on it, which I remember because it seemed like a very ordinary object for what it contained. Then I waited. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Dark blazer, white shirt, sensible heels. I had spent 3 evenings that week practicing my statements out loud in my bathroom. Not because I was nervous, but because precision mattered, and I wanted every word to land exactly where I intended it. I arrived at the Daily Center 20 minutes early, took the elevator to the 14th floor, found the right courtroom, sat down at the table on the left side and opened my folder. My husband arrived with Calloway and his mother. He looked good. He always looked good. It was one of the first things I'd noticed about him and probably the least important thing about him. But there it was. He glanced at me, looked at the table where my folder sat, looked for the attorney who wasn't there. He turned to Calloway and said something low and amused. Calloway smiled. His mother arranged herself in the gallery like she was settling in for something enjoyable. The judge entered, we stood, we sat, and the hearing began. For the first 40 minutes, Calloway was smooth. He laid out the terms of the prenuptial agreement with the confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times. He argued that the marital estate was modest relative to the business assets, which he characterized as entirely separate property. He submitted financials that I noticed were missing several line items I happened to know about. I sat quietly. I took notes. When it was my turn, I stood. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at me over those glasses. You're representing yourself, Miss Alderton. I am, Your Honor. All right, she made a note. Proceed. I had 12 exhibits. I introduced them one by one: property records, LLC filings, bank statements showing transfers to an account titled under a subsidiary that did not appear anywhere in the financial disclosures Calloway had submitted, a forensic accounting summary, prepared by a licensed CPA and signed, that described the discrepancy between reported income and actual cash flow across a 3-year period. The courtroom got quiet somewhere around Exhibit 7. I don't mean politely quiet. I mean the kind of quiet where you become aware of the ventilation system and the sound of someone's chair shifting. Calloway had stopped writing. My husband was very still. At Exhibit 9, the judge took her glasses off. She looked at me, she looked at the documents, she looked at Calloway. Counselor, she said, are you aware of the discrepancies in the financial disclosures your office submitted? Calloway said something about needing time to review. The judge said, very evenly, you'll have time. We're going to recess while I review this material, and I'm going to ask that the relevant documentation be preserved. She paused. All of it. She looked at my husband then, just for a moment, just long enough. He had gone the color of old paper. I need to tell you about the hallway because the hallway is the part I think about most. During the recess, I walked out and stood near the windows at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city. It was April. The lake was that particular gray-green it gets in spring, not quite blue yet, just beginning. A woman I didn't know walked past me and said simply, "Good for you." I don't know how she knew. I don't know if she'd been in the gallery or if I just looked like someone who'd done something. I said thank you. She kept walking. My husband's mother came out into the hallway about 10 minutes later. She walked toward me, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something cutting. She stopped about 4 feet away and looked at me. Her face was not what I expected. Not angry. Something more complicated than that. She turned and went back inside. We never spoke. We never needed to. The hearing resumed. The judge did not rule that day. Family court rarely does. But she issued 3 orders before we adjourned. She ordered a full forensic accounting of all marital assets. She ordered that the prenuptial agreement be reviewed in light of the financial irregularities, and she referred the matter to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for review of potential fraudulent disclosure. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Calloway asked for a continuance. The judge granted him 2 weeks. My husband sat at that table, and I watched him understand, slowly, that the story he'd been telling himself, about me, about what I knew, about what I was capable of, had been wrong. Not a little wrong. Completely wrong. For a long time. I picked up my folder. I thanked the court. I walked out. I will tell you what happened in the weeks after, because I know that's what you want to know. The federal referral moved faster than anyone expected. The transfers I had documented turned out to be part of a broader pattern. Funds from investor accounts that had been quietly redirected through the subsidiary. There were other people involved. My husband was not the only one, but he was one of them, and the documentation I had provided was, as it was described to me later, exceptionally organized. 3 of his properties were frozen pending investigation. 2 of his LLCs were suspended by the state. Calloway withdrew from the divorce case. My husband hired a new attorney, then a second one. The divorce settlement took another 4 months to finalize. What I received bore no resemblance to the $30,000 and a car he'd offered me at the beginning. The prenuptial agreement was set aside. I received my equitable share of the marital estate, including the appreciation on properties I had, as it turned out, helped finance through joint funds during the marriage, something the original prenup had conveniently not addressed. I am not going to tell you the exact number. What I will tell you is that it was enough. More than enough. It was the kind of number that meant I could take my time deciding what I wanted to do next. There are things I still think about. I think about the dinner party in Lincoln Park and Tess across the table and the way my husband smoothly closed the door on the version of me that knew things. I wonder sometimes if she ever found out what happened. I think about the woman in the hallway of the Daily Center who said "good for you" and walked away like she'd known me my whole life. I think about the Tuesday night in March when he sat me down at the kitchen table and was kind about taking everything from me. How certain he was. How much of that certainty was built on the assumption that I was exactly who he'd decided I was, that I'd stayed still in the frame he'd made while he was looking at other things. I think about how quietly a person can prepare, how much you can learn when no one thinks you're paying attention. I'm 33 now. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the South Loop, on a high floor with windows that face east. In the mornings when the light comes in, I make coffee and I sit at my desk and I work. I went back to finance. I passed my Series 66 last fall. I have a client list now, small, careful, mine. Sometimes people who know what happened ask me what it felt like, walking into that courtroom alone. Knowing what I knew. Watching his face when the judge took her glasses off. I tell them the truth. It didn't feel like revenge. Revenge implies the other person is still the center of the story. It felt like something quieter than that. Like setting a record straight. Like finally speaking at full volume in a room where I had spent years being told my voice was too small. He laughed when I walked in without a lawyer. The court didn't laugh. I used to think preparation was just a practical thing. Something you did before a test, before a job interview, before a trip. I didn't understand until much later that it could also be a form of integrity, a way of refusing to let someone else's version of you become the final version. My husband spent years deciding who I was, not cruelly, not all at once, just steadily, in small choices, the way water shapes a rock. He decided I didn't need to know things, that I was better suited to the background, that my understanding of finance was charming but not serious. And for a while, I let that decision sit in the room without challenging it. Not because I believed him, but because I was paying attention to other things. What I know now is that every choice he made had a consequence he didn't account for. Not punishment from the outside. Nothing that dramatic. Just the simple, quiet logic of cause and effect. He chose to hide money. The records existed anyway. He chose to underestimate me. I kept working anyway. He chose to laugh in that courtroom. The folder was already open on the table. That's the thing about cause and effect that people sometimes miss. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It just shows up one Tuesday morning on the 14th floor of the Daily Center, in the form of 12 exhibits and a judge who takes her glasses off. What got me through wasn't anger. Anger would have made me sloppy. What got me through was something closer to clarity. The decision to see things as they actually were, not as I wished they were or feared they were. To look at the numbers and follow them honestly wherever they led. To file the right forms with the right agencies and let the truth do what truth does when it's given enough space. And then there was the part that required something quieter and harder than intelligence. The part where I had to sit with the uncertainty for 14 months, where I had to walk into a courtroom without anyone beside me and trust that what I'd built was enough. That kind of endurance isn't loud. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just means you keep going on the days when keeping going feels like the least reasonable option available. I think about Tess sometimes, from that dinner party in Lincoln Park. The way she looked at me when I said the thing about cap rates, like she was recalibrating something. I wish I had corrected my husband that night, in front of everyone, calmly and without apology. But I also think there was something useful in waiting. In learning, first, exactly what I was dealing with. I'm not the same person I was at that kitchen table in March, listening to him explain kindly why I should expect very little. I'm harder in some ways, more careful about who gets to define me, but I'm also genuinely more at peace than I've been in years. Because I know now that I did the right thing, not just the effective thing. I gave the evidence to the people whose job it was to review it. I told the truth in a room that was designed for the truth to be told. I didn't exaggerate, didn't manipulate, didn't become something I wasn't in order to win. That matters to me, maybe more than the outcome. He laughed when I walked in without a lawyer. I think about that sometimes, not with satisfaction, but with something more like sadness. Because he really didn't know. And that was entirely his choice.